So we have our next guest, our final guest is Donna Beasley, and her book, My Mom, wait a minute, My Mama is Flying This
Mama is
Plane.
flying that
Yeah,
plane.
My Mom is Flying This Plane. Her book was a finalist last year in the Children's Book Awards process. So, and she's in the inaugural edition of the subscription box program that we just launched. So, Donna, thank you for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV to tell people about your book and your inclusion in the Black Authors Matter Children's Book Box.
I'm excited to be here, and always want to support anybody who's doing anything to promote Black children's books and reading for our children. And so I'm excited to be participating with the project.
Well,
Okay,
we're excited to have you.
Do you have a copy of your book handy?
I do, but I have to grab it. I actually forgot to bring it here.
Oh, okay.
Well, how
you know
far
what?
away is it? How far away is the book?
No. I got here, but I've got a, why don't I put it up on the screenshot? How about that?
Okay, you can do that because it's on share screen. The share screen
Yeah.
option is there. So
Yeah, so while I'm pulling it up, maybe I could just tell you a little bit about how it came about.
yes.
Okay.
And because you never know where a story comes from, right? So I actually couldn't sleep, and it was the middle of the night, and I was doing what I often do. I was reading and kind of scoping my email, and I happened to see the Google Doodle that day happened to be about Bessie Coleman.
Okay.
And so I got a real love for aviation, the early days of aviation, and I decided to just read it. And in the very end of the article, it talked about a man from Chicago who started an airplane factory and taught African-American men and women how to fly and how to build airplanes. I was astonished by this because I had actually been studying Black aviation for quite a while. In fact, one of my theses that I did when I was in school was actually on Black aviation. And I had never heard of William Powell. And it was a eye-opening. He actually had his own manufacturing company. He was a real advocate for Blacks in aviation back when aviation was in its infancy. And he also did a what they call barnstorming back then. And he would put on these shows where they had actual Black parachutists. So you had Black people building the planes, Black people flying the planes, and Black people hopping out of the planes as parachutists. And that was just a story to warm my heart. And that's really where the idea of, the story came from. So while it is fiction, it is based on some historical facts. And so in the back of this book, I talk about, what's the real Black history.
Oh, okay. Now, what made you do the title?
Well, the story.
I love the title.
Yeah, the story.
Yeah, I just wonder where, like, the foundation for it.
Well, one of the things that he did was he advertised in the Chicago Defender newspaper for people to come to his school in California, because he was a Chicagoan and he was an entrepreneur, and he sold his gas stations and went to California to start this manufacturing company to build planes. And he would run these ads in the newspaper, and particularly encouraging women to get involved. And that's really where I got the idea of a woman who wanted to be a pilot, because this was actually after Bessie Coleman. And so Bessie Coleman would, back then, she was often in the newspapers, and Chicago actually had an early aviation organization. I won't call it a club, but there were a bunch of them that flew together and that actually had planes. And some of the top flyers were women. And so it was a natural thing because I knew about, because I had written my thesis on Blacks in aviation in the early years, I knew about the women who flew. And so the names of the girls are actually the names of the pilots, the female pilots. And so that's kind of where the story came from. We're just talking about a mother who more than anything wants to learn how to fly the plane, but she's got obstacles. There's no money, she's got 2 daughters, how's she gonna support her daughters? And I felt like my goal was to show that, you can make a dream come true, no matter how big or how hard it might seem, that if you put your mind to it and you actually, you could go for it. And so that's really what I'm trying to capture in this book. So I'm trying to share the history of Blacks in aviation without being a history book. And but it was really and the illustrator on here, Edwin Harris, he did a fantastic job on these faces and the characters in a lot of these in the book. The 5 Blackbirds, which were the team that did the barnstorming, which included William Powell and a couple of pilots, but he did just a really great job of crafting and drawing the Blackbirds. And sometimes illustrators struggle with Black faces and Black features, and he just did a marvelous job in this book.
So what gave you your initial interest in aviation? It sounds like it's something you've been interested in for a while.
Yeah, it was, I don't actually, because this goes really back almost 20 years that I really started researching Blacks in aviation. But it was, I just really, there was a story in the, because I'm a genealogist, okay? So I was doing a lot of family research history. And while I was in, like some of these museums, and archives, I ran across the story of the first Black men to try to fly from California to New York, and the challenges that they have. And, part of my thesis was to write a novel, because I majored I'm a writer, obviously. So I was getting an MFA in writing, and I had to, and telling this story about these 2 men who flew, and of course it's fiction. So I created all the obstacles that they had overcome. But my research led me to finding out all these facts about Blacks in aviation, which is why when I heard about William Powell, I was struck by the fact that I didn't know about him from my research days. But he is pretty famous. He has the Smithsonian Institute actually just republished his biography I think it was this year or last year. It's called Black Wings. And just really an interesting story about the early days of Black aviation. If you're interested in it, I highly recommend it as a read.
Okay, so your study of genealogy, now do you do that as a profession or as a hobby?
It was a hobby. No, it was a hobby. Okay. And my uncle, I come from a really big family. My mother was one of 20, and I've got 65 first cousins. Okay.
I had 65 first cousins.
Okay, so you come from a big family.
Yeah. On both sides. It was the combination. My mother was one of 16. And then one of my uncles on my dad's side had 16 children.
Yeah.
So
it's the same kind of scenario, right?
Yeah.
And but my uncle saved some of the great grandparents and great grandparents. He had information. And he brought it to me one day. And now he had 5 kids. Why he brought it to me, I'm never really sure, but he did. And I ran with it because I thought it was the greatest thing ever to know, roots, everybody back then, everybody knew about roots and, the Alex Haley story. And I just ran with it. And that's how I ended up being a researcher. That's how I got into research. That's historical research. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I learned as a genealogist, because I wrote my family's genealogy book, and I did it by interviewing my 20 uncles and aunts that were still living at the time. All 20 of them weren't alive, but of those that were. And the thing that I learned was that everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
And that, it was like amazing the things I found out about my aunts and uncles that I didn't know. And little things, you think these, because they don't think they've got a story, but my Aunt Rita, who's been my Aunt Rita her whole life, actually turned out to be Aunt Louise. She took the name Aunt Rita because she liked Rita Hayworth. And so she was, one of my aunts was a bootlegger. And what she would do was she would deliver her, in the baby carriage, she'd put the booze under the baby and make her deliveries. So it was just these like little quirks about, my uncle was one of the youngest sergeants ever in the military, in the army. So it's just these little quirky things about our families that change me from, not liking history to loving history. Because when your family is history, and really, what is history but the story of families, right?
Yeah. Right.
But you don't think of it until it's your family.
Right.
And so
yeah, this is the history normally it's other people's family.
Right.
You're learning about other people's families.
Exactly.
Not
right.
yours.
And other people's accomplishments.
Right.
When we look at our family and start looking at our accomplishments and our family's accomplishments, and they don't always have to be big, like becoming the first pilot,
Right.
But there are stories and our stories to tell. And that's kind of like, what I try to do is share my sense of family. Most of my stories are about family, because that's what I relate to, because I come from that big family.
Yeah. That's
I love the fact that you celebrate your family history and you're keeping it alive in your special way.
Yeah, and as luck would have it, one of my uncles was a photographer.
Okay.
And so I had pictures of all these aunts and uncles over the decades to put in the book. And so I remember the day that, because I didn't tell any of my family that I was doing the book. They knew I was doing the interviews because I was everywhere doing interviews. Me and my cousin Brenda, she went with me. And we interviewed all of these aunts and uncles. But then when I put the book together, where they had each aunt or uncle had their own story, and each of them had photographs. And then I had these photographs of my cousins when they were like little kids, around my grandparents. It'd be like, 30 of them, 40 of them around my grandparents. And it was such a big hit at the family reunion when because I brought copies for every family. And, it just, well, they still talk about it to this day, about how amazing it was to see it all together like that in a book.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's really great that you are able to capture the history, because so many people, for whatever reason, that in order for the history to be captured, somebody has to capture it.
Right.
And your uncle, is that who you said, your uncle or your grandfather gave it to you? He gave it to the person who he knew would do something with it.
Yeah, apparently, because I certainly ran with it. That's for sure. And I don't think he didn't live to see the finished product. But it takes years to reach. Yeah. I found a whole line of relatives that I didn't even know about. I was able to trace us all the way back to the Civil War. One other thing that was unique about my research was that my great aunt was an Indian. Okay, she was a Cherokee Indian. And she was kidnapped off the bank of the James River on the East Coast and sold into slavery.
Wow.
But the slave owner's son and her ended up in I won't call it a marriage, but they ended up as a couple, and they had like 16 kids. Okay.
Wow.
Oh.
But when the slave owner died, he did not leave a will. And that meant that my aunt, even though, she was the common law wife to the son, she was still a property of the estate. And so were all his children. So despite that he was the slave owner's son, the slave owner owned all the children because they were all slaves. that turned out to be a boon for me because he died without a will. And so they were assets. And so I was able to track their sale and everything, because they were part of the court discovery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I would have lost all that if it had not been for that.
For
So,
that.
I have oral stories because people talked about how my the slave owner's son, how he had to buy his own children back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so interesting stuff like that. When you start getting into your family story, you don't know what people been up to. It's just people are fascinating.
They really are. That
Yeah.
that reminds me of those two sisters having our say when they went
Yes.
back, and they were their grandmother, I think it was married to, and I don't know if they actually were married or common law, but she was married to a white man, and they had the kids.
Right. And then the
that was a
kids
very
being
fascinating
mixed could
story.
only marry other Black people. So that's
Right.
really how that's how the
Right.
line got really, good and juicy Black,
Right.
because, they couldn't go off and marry white people because they were,
Right.
so
Unless they really left and passed. Like they would have to cut all ties.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
the family.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah,
go north and then just pass.
Right. But
Become a whole
luckily
nother
they
person.
didn't do that.
Yeah, fortunately they did. But
Yeah.
some did,
Yeah.
back during that time.
Yeah.
So is this the my mama's flying that plane? Is this your only children's book?
No, as a matter of fact, I started out with a book called Music in the Family because my family was very musical. Not me, but they were.
You were the writer.
My cousin and my brother had a band, and they used to play in the basement. And so growing up as a kid, I grew up with these jam sessions in the basement. So Music in the Family is a story about a kid who was growing up and he wanted to get in the family band, but he wasn't good enough yet. And so, it's kind of his journey in the story. And I have one, we were talking about, historical stuff. And when I was growing up, there were no Black cowboys on TV. And that bothered me. So when I got old enough to start writing my own children's books, one of the first ones I wanted to do was about Black cowboys. And so I have a book called Blaze Barton's First Cattle Drive. And, as I mentioned, a lot of my stories center around a family. And in this case, this is a father, grandfather, and grandson who are on this cattle drive, and their experiences and the relationship between them, so that one. And then I have Cason's Kite, which is the story of, I have a lot of friends who are single dads, and single dads don't get a lot of love in children's books.
Yeah.
And this is a story of Kason and his dad and their relationship. And, Kason wants to go to the kite, they're having a kite festival. And, his dad teaches him how to make the kite, and they go to the festival. Of course, there's trouble, and, Kason's got to solve it. So, my stories do tend to center around family relationships, whether they're historical or, and in the Mama, I'm Flying That Plane book, the little girl is on the day of the big brainstorm event. It happens to be her birthday, and so and that is the first time she actually sees her mother flying the plane. And so that's kind of where it comes from. Yeah.
Okay.
And she pretty much yells, "That's my mama flying that plane," so.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a statement of pride. I mean,
Yeah.
That's excitement. I mean,
Yeah.
I know if I saw my mama flying a plane, I'd be like, I am saying the same thing.
Right.
Pointing up there. Well, when we were looking at the books to include in the BookBox subscription service, we wanted to have a good balance of history and entertainment. And we just wanted a variety. We wanted a good variety that people could choose from at different age levels. And so that's why your book was selected for the inaugural edition,
Mhm,
because it fit that criteria. We
okay,
didn't want to have the same stories. We didn't want to have all the books with the same stories.
right,
Right.
right.
Wanted
Well,
a
variety,
variety.
variety is good because kids
Mhm.
need to see us in a variety of ways and doing
Yeah.
things. And, and I think it's important to know that we were there in the beginning. We were there when they built the plant, when the aviation started. We were there when there were Black cowboys. 25% of all cowboys were Black cowboys. So,
And
so
that
that's
makes
what I'm saying.
sense, although
Yeah,
they didn't get the recognition in,
yeah,
I'll say, folklore, for lack of a better
right,
term.
yeah.
So
And so,
the fact, the
yeah,
only Black cowboy I remember, and I watch old episodes of the Big Valley. And there was an episode of the Big Valley where Lou Rawls,
Oh my goodness, you went way back.
yeah, was a cowboy. And
oh, wow.
it stuck in my mind because that was the only Black
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
person I saw as a cowboy
I used to
on
watch Big
there.
Valley too. I'm gonna have to go back and see if I can find
Yeah,
that episode.
yeah. Lou Rawls was on there, and as a cowboy, he did
Uh-huh.
actual cowboy tricks. They
Yeah.
had the other one episode had, I want to say is it you? His last name is Koto. You fat, you're fat. He did a lot of acting. You're fat, Koto. I'm not sure.
Oh,
I can't
Jeffrey Holton? Was it?
dark skin with a round head.
Yeah, I think his name was I'm thinking
I thought it
Jeffrey.
was started with a Y.
Oh.
You
It
got
started
me.
with a Y.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
you
yeah.
know who he is,
Yeah, yes, yeah,
Rhonda.
yeah.
He was in a lot of
He
movies.
was.
But he was in an episode of the Big Valley but he was on a chain gang, like he was a prisoner.
Mhm.
But Lou Rawls was the cowboy. That's what,
Okay.
that's what and I like some of those old episodes of shows because they're just so pure.
Yeah.
There is no,
Well,
it's no mind games being played or anything.
I watched a lot
Nothing
of
weird.
Westerns because my father he loved Westerns. And that's how
Yeah.
come I know there were no Black cowboys in it, because I saw all the Western shows.
Okay. Yeah, my dad
Rifleman,
used to
Big
like them
Valley,
too.
all of
Yeah.
the Rawhide,
Yeah.
because he was a big
What am I?
fan of
Yeah, my
cowboys.
dad. Oh, Bonanza. My dad used to watch
Bonanza, yeah.
that.
And so I
But
didn't
there
want
is an
I didn't want
episode
those
of the Big
kids to
Valley.
know. I wanted them to know that there were Black cowboys, and so I put them in a book.
That's really great. So tell people how they can get a copy of your book and keep in touch with you, learn more about your work and so forth.
All right, so I'm a publisher. I'm a children's book publisher, and my website is called KazoomKidsBooks.com. And so you can certainly find us there. Most of our titles are also sold on Amazon. Yeah, visit us online. We have a Facebook page also, Kazoom Kids Books.
Okay. Now you didn't have that publisher title in your information. So this is the first I'm hearing about you being a publisher of children's books.
Yeah.
This is the first you didn't tell us that. So that's like it's like you hid that little fact.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So
So tell us about that. Tell us.
So I'm a children's book publisher. I started out in 2016, and I did only interactive books, ebooks, and my books then had sight, sound, motion, and animation, and it was an app. But then COVID came along, and basically, no one was resubscribing. It was like the world was falling apart.
Right.
And I had to pivot. I had to pivot from being an ebook publisher to a traditional print publisher. And so during the COVID years, you couldn't really go sell in stores or anything. And I couldn't actually sell, the subscriptions the way that I wanted. So I started, I got into the print, not printing them, but creating print books. Okay. And so that's what I did during the COVID years. And when COVID ended, then I started marketing and selling the books, because by then I had built up a I had about, I think 6 or 7 books at the time, by the time COVID ended, that I had published. Some of them I wrote and that I told you about, but I've also published works by others.
Okay, because I was going to ask that, is your publishing company just for your books, or
No.
do you publish other people's books?
Right. So, yeah. And so as we move forward into 2024, I'm not so much looking to publish other people's books as I'm looking now to create characters-driven books, characters that I can then turn into, you know, TV shows, or, you know, maybe license them in terms of clothing, that kind of thing. I'm really, you know, looking to create characters that are memorable and lovable. That's my goal.
Oh,
Memorable and lovable. I love that. Well, I just want you to know that Lydia Bruce says she's already downloaded the cowboy book.
Thanks, Lydia.
So so
Oh,
keep
yeah,
what you're doing, because you're
Okay.
inspiring people.
yeah, Pam Wade said his first name is Yafet,
Yes, that's it.
Yaphet, and his last name is Kotto, Kotto. I'm almost positive about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
He was in a lot of movies.
Yes, he
but he was
was.
never like the lead actor.
Right.
He was always like a co-star, or not
Mhm.
even really a co-star. But he did a lot of acting. And if you saw his face, you would know who I was talking about.
Oh yeah, I know exactly who you mean.
Well,
Yeah.
no, Rhonda, I was talking
Oh,
about.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been in a lot of movies. Yeah, you would know him when you saw him. Mhm.
You would know. And I think he died kind of recently, in the last year or so, or two. He died kind of sort of recently. Well, so if there was an author out there with an amazing character-driven story that wanted to connect with you, then how would they go about doing it?
Yeah, email us, Donna@KazumKidsBooks.com. Easy to remember.
Okay, and you are looking for content?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I just want to put it out
Character-driven
there.
content, as you pointed out.
Character-driven, right, character-driven content, so.
Well, we did put your link to your paperback in the chat. But repeat your website one more time. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat right now.
KazumKidsBooks.com.
Okay, spell that.
KazumKidsBooks. KazumKidsBooks.com.
Got it. It is in the chat. So everybody go ahead and support this author. She is doing wonderful things for our children.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I've loved being on here, and I love the work that you guys do. I mean, I think your work in supporting Black authors is exceptional. So I always try to participate when I can.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you have a great evening.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.